Hey, is this thing on? Are we recording? Can I get a tech person? Oh, for the love of ed tech. Joining us today is Matt Skoczylas, who is an elementary computer teacher and Google certified trainer from Ellwood City Schools in Pennsylvania. So, hi, Matt.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you. And I'll give our listeners just a little bit of background that Matt and I met briefly at the Google Summit last May, and you were telling us about these necklaces that your students had created. And I was really intrigued. And so that has led to our conversation today.
Yes.
Yeah. So before we talk about that really cool project, I want to know how you decided to become a teacher.
All right. Well, this is my 25th year of being an elementary computer teacher here in Ellwood City. I started the program. I've worked with PCs. I've worked with Macs. Now we're on Chromebooks, but this is my 25th year here. So even before that, even before even college, I worked with my junior church program with the little kids, and yeah, I didn't think anything of it. I'm working with them, teaching them these Bible stories and things like that. And my sister's like, "Well, Matt, you're so good at with these kids. Why don't you go and become a teacher?" And at that point, you're young and you don't know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, never really thought about it that way. So then I applied to different universities and I got in, and I'm like, well, maybe I'm going to try this elementary, see what it's like. So I got in, and my certification is just elementary education. But I did get a little background. So this was in the 90s. I'll date myself. I'm pretty old here. So in the 90s, laptop computers weren't prevalent, and I was just learning in college on laptop on these computers and things like that. So we had to pick a minor or concentration, and I'm like,
Oh, yeah,
well,
yeah.
these computer things are just coming out, and they intrigued me a little bit, and so I'm like, well, I'm going to try it. So through my degree through Clarion University of Pennsylvania, I was able to get a concentration in computers, which was great. I
Yeah, on the
graduated.
cutting edge.
Right, right. And I didn't, it was fine. I didn't know too much, but I was intrigued with it. I loved it.
Yeah.
And then right out of college, I started substituting. Um, the kids were just so funny. Like, you would walk into a class, you would be their substitute, and they had never seen you again. And I was young back then, and they're thinking I'm really cool. Like, who's this cool guy coming in? He's young and trying to teach us things. And I just really, really enjoyed it. And I got to meet a lot of people. I think I subbed at 6 different districts here in the area.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I'm a graduate of Ellwood City as well. So
Oh,
I think
okay.
that helped me, get in. So I was an aide for 2 years with a special needs boy who kind of, I worked with him, and he had a Dynavox to talk with. So I was kind of still in the computer business, trying to figure out how to work this Dynavox, this talking machine. And so there was a position opened. There were 6 elementary positions open at the time, and one of them happened to be a computer position. It was the first of its kind. I didn't really know anything about it, and the teachers didn't know anything about it. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, well, I have this background in computers. Let's go for it. So I was able to interview and talk a little bit about what I did in college, what I've done at home with my personal computer, and lo and behold, I got the job. But I didn't
Nice.
know what to do, like, what do you
Yeah.
do in this position? So back then, I taught 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade computer class. I would have a lab in each one of those buildings, and we used iMacs. Now, those were those big computers. You could see through them. They were clear. Some of them were purple and pink, and my lab
Apple
looked beautiful.
green.
Yes, my
Yes.
lab looked beautiful. It was beautiful, and the kids were all, "Oh, I want the green one, or I want the pink one, or I want the blue one." So, it was new to me, and it was new to them, and I think I didn't have many discipline problems because I think the kids wanted to learn about it,
Mm.
and they wanted to know a little bit about, it was AppleWorks back then. We did some drawing, and Hyper Studio was big, where you could like actually make buttons, and you can move to the next screen, and you can draw on it. And so we were
Oh,
making like
cool.
small presentations and things like that way back, in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002 in Hyper Studio. And it just kind of grew through that, after those iMacs were finished, we got PCs, and I had to learn a whole new system. We
Yeah, for
used
sure.
Windows, we used, PowerPoint then, and Word. And so, again, changing degrees a little bit, and making new plans and things like that. But then the biggest thing hit is when we got laptops, and they were small. We got to take them home, and the kids got to use them. So again, using PCs, and I was always intrigued with more and more. Like, what else can we do with these?
Yeah.
And then finally we moved to Chromebooks, which I love my Chromebook. That's what I'm using now. I've got two Chromebooks at home. My kids all have them, and I think you can do so much with a Chromebook, and it just kind of escalated to that. And I love my job. Who would have thought
That's
25 years ago,
yeah.
this kid, he wanted a degree in elementary education, wanted his own classroom, and here I am, teaching computers for 25 years. So it's been a great ride, and I enjoy it. I enjoy it every day of it.
Well, and that's what's great about it is one that you still love it, and two, with technology, it's always changing. So if it's something you really enjoy, there's always something new to try or a different lane to get in. And
Right.
so,
Yep.
yeah, that's a good segue into, I feel like, this project. So I'm curious. It's called The Mountains Are Calling, I Must Go, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So that is a quote from John Muir. And John Muir was the father of these national parks that we have. We have 63 major national parks in the United States. And way back when, he wanted to preserve them. And we're so glad that he preserved them. And he went around, and he went to Congress, and he wanted to fight for these spaces so that they could be enjoyed by everyone. And we've got 63 beautiful places that we can visit here in the United States.
Yeah, which is wonderful. I will say that maybe this is why this resonated with me is because I love the national parks, and I
Hmm.
feel like their popularity has only grown since COVID and everybody being locked down and realizing how nice it is to get outside and enjoy what
Right.
is in your backyard. So,
Right.
what first of all, I guess, what kind of I guess let's start with what is the project maybe, and then what inspired it? Like, in the short version, then we can dig in, I
Okay.
guess.
This is a big, like a project-based learning project that I've come up with way back in 2019. My family, my wife and two daughters, we visited Acadia National Park. And my wife and I had been there before, and we stayed at a cabin. We were able to, tell them a little bit about it, tell them what they were going to see. And taking them there, they loved it. They loved being out into nature. They were able to get a junior ranger book from the parks, the park rangers there, and they were able to do this book. They were able to turn, stones over. They were able to investigate, and they loved it. And I told my wife, and I'm like, well, if they loved it this much, can I bring that back to my class? And what can I do to help them, preserve nature, and enjoy it this much, and involve technology in it? So
Yeah.
when we got back, that was the summer of 2019. When we got back to school, we had an in-service day, and our superintendent at the time kind of like challenged us to do a project-based lesson. And we had in-services that talked about how you would do a project-based lesson. And I'm like, well, I think I'm going to do something on these national parks. Like, what can I do to, show the students where they are, research them a little bit, and then tell others about it. So at the time, I'm like, well, this fits fairly well into like a slideshow, like a Google slideshow. So I kind of set up a template on what we would follow, and, you know, researching them, showing pictures, what you can do there. And then I kind of turned it into like, well, if you would do this vacation, or if you would go to these places, how much would it cost? So then
Ah,
I'm like, well, we can do a Google spreadsheet, and we can talk a little bit about, budgeting, and adding up and showing them the formulas in the Google spreadsheet. I'm like, well, then I we can do Google Slides, we can do, our spreadsheet. What else Google can we do, to investigate this project? So I'm like, well, we can keep our notes in Google Keep,
oh, keep.
and we can show them a little bit about that. So it just kept on going. Like, what else can I do? What else can I do? And then we ended up taking pictures of the national parks and then photo editing them into the picture. So it actually looked like they were there. So we used remove.bg, and we were able to add that to the slideshow. So they actually were there into the national park. They were actually there in their photo. And then I'm like, well, if you would go to the national park, you would probably want a souvenir. So I'm like, well, we've got this 3D printer in the lab. So let's 3D print like an arrowhead, because that's the logo of the national parks. And they were able to pick like an animal that they from their national park and put it into that arrowhead, and we'll 3D print it. And that can be like their souvenir keychain that they would get from the national parks.
Oh, how
So
cool.
in my mind, I'm going through all of these things. I'm like, well, this is going to take a long time. Like, this is going to take the majority of the year to get this done. And
Yeah,
so
because you have your kids for how long?
I have them for 30 minutes every week. So once a week, they would see me for 30 minutes.
Minutes. Okay.
So
So
it's a big job. And I'm like, well, it's going to take us a while, but I'm going to be teaching them, Google Slides. I'm going to be teaching them, a spreadsheet, and we're going to do Google Keep. We're going to talk about this budget. And so in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to give it all that I can and see what we can come up with. And going in at the start of that year, at the beginning of 2019, I'm like, okay, we're going to go in. I went to my classes. I said, well, we're going to do a project, and it's going to take the whole year. And they're like, what?
what
What? And they're
in
like,
the world?
a whole year? Like, what are we going to do? I'm like, just take it easy. We're going to plan a trip. And we talked about, did you guys go on vacation? Where would you go on vacation? And I said, well, there's these great places called, national parks. And then I would show them a video, and they're like, oh yeah, I know that place, or I know Old Faithful, or, I've seen pictures of the Arch in Arches National Park, and I've seen the Redwood Forest and things like that. So they knew where these places were, but not what state they were in. And
Yeah.
I guess I should say this project is for fourth grade,
Okay.
because
Oh, yes,
this
because all
this all fourth graders get in free to national parks. So it
parks.
fit in so beautifully with the project. And so I'm like, at the very end, they're going to get their national park pass, and then they can go, free with their family to these national parks. So this is a fourth grade lesson, 30 minutes in and out of those classes. And I said, we're going to do this project the whole year. And you know what? That whole year, up until COVID, I did not receive one complaint from them saying, oh, we're doing this project again, or, why do we have to do this? And it was so neat because it changed. Like, it changed a little bit. Like, we started with the slideshow, and we talked about what national parks would you go to? And I had them narrow it down to 3. They were going to visit 3 national parks.
Okay.
So
Each kid got
each
to
kid would
choose 3?
Yep, each
Okay.
student got to choose 3 national parks, and I said, "Well, you'll probably want to visit them that are some parks that are close by, because you don't want to be traveling. If you're going on a trip, you don't want to be traveling from Acadia, which is in Maine,
Alaska.
all the way over to, the Redwood Forest in California." So we kind of pinpointed, and I made a map. I made a Google map, and I pinpointed all the national parks on them. So they got
Oh,
to see
cool.
of the United States where these places were, and they got to click on them, and they got to show what park they were. So that was like the first day of class. Okay, where are these national parks? Investigate them. What are they? What would you see out there? And then they were able to narrow it down to the 3 that they would want. So first couple slides are the 3 that they picked, and then what's something that you could do there? What's one thing that it's known for? So
Okay.
Yellowstone's known for Old Faithful. And they were able to write a little bit about that. So they're investigating these national parks, they're researching them. And then we actually made a Google map. So that was another part of the Google My Maps. You were able to map where your park was. So we opened up Google Maps, we pinpointed where these parks were. So they actually got to see what state that they were in, if they were close by. And I'm like, well, if that's not close by, you might want to pick another one. So we got to revisit it a little bit and say, okay, well, this one's closer, so maybe visit that one instead of, the one that you had picked.
Yeah, okay.
So
How
we were able to
cool.
do a slideshow. We were able to do, incorporate Google My Maps with it. And then we talked about the budget. So, okay, so if you were going to go to these 3 parks, how much would it cost? So I made a template for them to use in Google Sheets, and that template, talked about the airfare. So naturally, a lot of these parks are in the West. So how are you going to get there? And if you would drive, it's going to take a lot of time to get out there. So I had a map that they could see all the different airports that are close by to these national parks, and they got to say, okay, well, if I was going to go to Yellowstone, Wind Cave, and Badlands, maybe I would fly into Denver. And then on that map, they were able to see, well, it costs, $256 for a plane ticket to fly from Pittsburgh to Denver. And I would say, well, that's just for one person. And you can't
Yeah.
go by yourself. So you have to at
Yeah.
least take one parent. And then I said, well, you could take maybe your whole family. Maybe that would be nice. Or maybe you wanted to take a friend, but you have to take at least one adult. So in the Google spreadsheet, I would say, how much does it cost for one ticket? Then how many people are going? So it would multiply it. And then it would say, okay, it's going to cost $1,365 just for one way to get to Pittsburgh to Denver. Okay, so you can't
Yeah.
stay out there. So you have
Right.
to travel back. So how much would be your plane ticket back be? So that was just one page of the Google sheet. And that was just one day of class because we had to talk about, flying in, what would be the closest. And then they got to see, okay, wow, that's a lot of money. And whenever I would be leaving the class, they would still be talking about it. And I thought it's so nice to hear that. Like they're still talking about class whenever I'm ready to leave. I just think that's so nice
Yeah.
because they don't know the cost of things very well. And this gives them that
Right.
first view.
If you like this podcast, check out our latest, Minds Over Media, a collaboration between Soida and the University of Cincinnati, delving into diverse aspects of media literacy. Uncover the power of media literacy through insightful conversations and gain valuable insight from esteemed scholars and dedicated educators navigating this complex landscape. Check it out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
So then the next day of class, again, we're working with these Google Sheets. So we have to rent a car. So you can't stay at the airport. You have to actually, rent a car to get to these places. So I had a list of different cars that they could rent and the cost of them. So whether you wanted like a small car, if you were only taking like one or two people or two or three people, if you were going to take a family, you would maybe want a mid-sized car. Or if you were taking a lot of people in your family, maybe you would take a minivan.
Yeah.
Or if you wanted to rent an RV, that's fine too, but it's just going to cost a lot more money and a lot more gas. So we had to decide what kind of car that they would take. And then we had to decide, I had just different templates of different costs for each car.
Okay.
And then what we did is we talked about gas mileage. So we had to pinpoint where these things were on the map. And in Google Maps, we would map. So how many miles would it be from, Yellowstone to Wind Cave to Badlands on all the way back to your airport again. So they got their total
Okay.
miles. So then we got your total miles. We got how much the car would cost. How much gas would you need? So we had a formula for that.
Oh,
And then we had
wow.
the total cost of this transportation. How much is it going to cost just for transportation? Your car, your gas. How much is that going to cost? So that the last page of the spreadsheet, I had the grand total of it. So we're adding up the plane ticket, we're adding up the cost of the transportation. Well, unfortunately, you have to eat. So
Yeah.
how much is it going to cost for your family of, 4 or 5 to eat? They can eat breakfast. They have to eat breakfast every day. They have to eat lunch every day. They have to eat, dinner every day. Are you going to eat out? Are you going to have fast food? Are you going to have a restaurant that you're going to be eating at? How much is that going to cost? So that in that template of the spreadsheet, they had to tell me, okay, how much is breakfast going to cost? And I had a paper for them that says, if you're going to have a fast food, it's going to be $4 per person. If you were going to
Okay.
eat at a restaurant, it would be $12. So they were able to look at the template, they fill in the numbers on the spreadsheet. Everybody has to eat. So if you're taking 4 people, all 4 people have to eat. And then at the very bottom, it adds it all up. So how much does food cost? um,
Wow.
so we talked about that. And then we talked about, okay, you're going to have food, you're going to have a car, you have plane tickets, but then, where are you going to stay? And in the national park, you can camp. You can camp in
Mhm.
a tent and things like that, or you could get a hotel that's either on campus, on site of the national park, or outside of the national park. If you rented an RV, that's great, but you have to
Oh,
cost that to hook up to a, a,
so
a campground and do all of that. So we talked about how much is that going to cost for hotels for 7 days. This was going to be a 7-day trip. So finally, the last day, these were all consecutive days, the last day, okay, well, you're gonna want to buy souvenirs and you're gonna want to do things. So that all costs money. So again, I had a template for them to use. Maybe you wanted to do a hike. Well, hiking is free. That's good. So everybody's gonna
yeah.
do hiking one day, but maybe you're gonna do horseback riding, or maybe you want to rent a kayak and kayak down, the Snake River at Grand Teton. Well, that's gonna cost money. And again, I had a little template for them to follow and they filled it in. And I said, okay, well,
Wow.
this is how much your trip is going to cost. And we were able to see all those grand totals. And it's funny. The average cost, I've been doing this now for a couple years now, is like $7,000 for a national park trip for 7 days. So that's kind of like the average trip I got to
Wow.
see. So, but
Wow.
it all started way back when we went to Acadia. My
Yeah.
family and I, they loved it. They got to see nature firsthand. They got to see all of this, and I just wanted to bring it back to my kids and say, what can we do to bring this back? And one of the last things we did right before COVID hit, because this was COVID year 2019 20. The last thing
20.
that we did with the project was we got VR headsets, and we were able to see and go to some of these parks, virtually. And that was my last lesson right before we left in March of that year. And kids loved it. And like I said, they never complained. They never said, this lesson again. Why are we doing this again?
Yeah.
But because I think every lesson was different, it was part of the same project, but they got to see it grow.
It was
Um,
different, and they probably connected to it that it was like a real world use.
right,
I
right.
think it'll be something that they'll remember forever.
Right. So that year we didn't get to make the medallion, print medallion, because we didn't have time. And again, I said it was going to be a whole year. So the next year was again COVID at the beginning, but we were able to finish the project and we were able to make 3D print medallions for them to take home. They loved it. They were able to present their project to the class, and that's really what I wanted them to do, is to present each one of their slideshows to the class so they could see all of these places that they could go to in the United States, whether they're visiting or whether they're hiking, just to be able to see the diversity of our country, the United States.
Yeah.
So it just exploded after that. And I got to share this project at Pete and C, which is our technology conference in Pennsylvania.
Oh, and cool.
And then I'm like, well, I want to add more to it. What else can I add to it? So it went from a slideshow to a web page. And so now I'm teaching Google
Oh,
Site for fourth grade, and we're making a page for each national park. We're making a page for the budget. We're making a page for their photos, and they can add photos to it. They're adding photos, with their background and things like that with them inside of it. And
that's
I love
cool.
teaching it. It's one of my favorite things. I'm like, I don't go into the class saying, oh, we're gonna you do typing practice today, because you are typing, because you are, learning math, you are learning social studies to know where all these places are. And it just connects so nicely, especially fourth grade, because fourth grade uses states and capitals, they're exploring, the history of expansion. So it just fits really, really nice in my fourth grade curriculum.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm gonna ask too about the medallions.
Okay.
Do the kids okay, do you have, like, a template that's set up in something like Tinkercad? Or
Right.
okay,
Yep.
how does that whole piece of it work?
So I have a template it's the arrowhead of the national park. And they go
Okay,
to into Tinkercad and they make a copy of that. And then I ask
okay.
them, okay, so pick one of your national parks. And they pick one of their national parks. And I'm like, okay, what's an animal from that national park? So then we have to do a Google search for that animal, and we have to find like a silhouette of it so that the 3D
Okay.
printer can print it out. So then we talk about, the silhouette. What is a silhouette? And we do a Google search for the silhouette. Then we download it. And I'm like, well, this file will not work for the 3D printer. We have to make it into a different type of file, an STL file. So then we talk about how you can convert a file. So we go to an online
Okay.
converter.
Oh my
We
gosh, so
convert
many
that we
great technology
right.
lessons.
So we upload the picture, we download it as a STL file, and then we upload it into Tinkercad, and then they make it into a whole. So, inside of
Okay.
the medallion, there's the whole of their animal. I'm okay. Okay. Well, now there's another step because now you have to share it with me. So we have to download it, and then we upload it into Google Classroom so I can take it to the printer and print it out.
Print it.
And
Oh
that's
my
one thing that I
gosh.
do. It's just because their Chromebooks aren't adjusted to the printer, the
Right,
3D
yeah.
printer. So it's easier for me to just print them out. But then this past year, we were able to get a Glowforge, and a Glowforge is a laser printer. So I'm like, well, I'm going to take this one step further here, and instead of the 3D print, I'm going to make it into a laser cut, so it kind of looks like something you would buy at a national park. So what you saw at the Ohio Summit was
Yeah,
this
the
necklace. It
wooden
was
ones.
it was a wooden one. It was 3D, or it was printed by the Glowforge, and did the same thing in Tinkercad. We just made it into a different file so the laser printer can read it. And usually the 3D printer, it takes a while. I can do 10 at a time, and it takes a while for it to print out. But the laser cutter, I think I had them all done in like a half an hour.
Oh my gosh,
I had like 100 necklaces.
I've always wanted to use a Glowforge. Like,
Oh,
they look magnificent,
yes,
like,
they're
all the stuff you
beautiful.
can do.
Yeah, you can do so many things, and that's one of the things that we've done with the Glowforge. We made like Christmas ornaments and things like that. But
Oh,
it's
cool.
just a fun tool, and the kids are like, "Wow, this really looks like something you would buy at a gift shop at a national park."
Yeah, it really does. It really does, and before we were going to talk, what mine is in my backpack, my work backpack that I
Mhm.
carry, and our office administrator, she's like, "I still have mine right here too." Like, so we still have our necklaces that we got from you at the
All
conference.
right. Well, everybody loved them because at the conference, I'm like, "Well, here's your souvenir from coming to, the mountains are calling, and you must go." So, everybody got a necklace there too, and it was so much fun to present. And I think it just incorporates so much, like you said, you're doing so much technology with this lesson, and the kids don't get bored with it.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
you're
one thing I
crossing
really like
over
about
so many.
project-based learning. There's
Yeah,
so
go
many
ahead,
things
sorry.
that you can do with project-based learning with this lesson. And I've done like a cereal box with my fifth and sixth graders where they had to design a cereal box and relabel like a different cereal, and we
Cool.
3D print a spoon. And so it's instead of just like a one and done lesson, like so many people
Mhm.
do, like, okay, we're just going to do, this document today. We're going to type a document and then be done with it. And the next week, we're going to talk a little bit about how you make a slideshow, which is great. But if
Mhm.
you're incorporating something that they would do in class, or if you're incorporating something that they are interested in, it makes it, 10 times better for them.
Yeah, for sure, and like I said before, it'll be something that they'll remember forever
Right. And I still see
because
like their 3D print their medallions on their backpack, or they're still wearing their necklace from last year.
cute.
So it's nice to see. They're like, oh yeah, I still have mine. And they'll show it to me, fifth and sixth grade. So it is something that is memorable to them. And then like in our sixth grade class, we also do a web page there. And I'm like, well, way back in fourth grade, you remember making your national park website? I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. And I'm like, does anybody remember their national park that they went to, or they investigated, and they know them? So
That's
it's
so
something that
cool.
they will remember, and hopefully they will get to visit. Now, whenever I
Yeah.
do give out my fourth grade passes at the end of the year, I'm like, okay, well, some national parks you have to pay to get in, and
Mhm.
some are free, and that's great too. But if you do go to like Yellowstone, you have to pay. Your family has to pay to get in, but you don't, and your family doesn't. So it's something that I can share with them. And I did have quite a few, maybe like 10 students that second year or third year go to different national parks. A couple went to Yellowstone, a couple went to Badlands or
Oh,
Acadia. So
awesome.
So it is kind of growing into that. Or somebody here at school will say, well, did you ever go to Glacier National Park? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've been there. And I'll tell them a little bit about it. So
That's
it's fun for
cool.
me too, because I collect stickers for my computer and I put them on there, and they're like, oh, I love your stickers. And so it's just something
That's so
for the
cool.
staff. So I'm known as the national park geek here in Ellwood City.
Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
I love it. Well, okay, so because this is a huge kind of project-based learning, like a project, if you were gonna give advice to a teacher who wanted to do something like this, I what would you tell them, I guess, just to get them started? Even if it's not national parks, maybe
Right,
there's
right.
something else that they've thought about, like, "Oh, I'd really like to share that with my students."
Right. I think one thing, you have to make it like personal to the students, something
Okay.
that they are going to take away from it, something that they can grow from, and just take it one step at a time and just build it. And like I knew that this project was going to take the whole year, and I could probably put it into like a year and a half now because I have so much material. And like we said, even before we started recording, I it's like the fastest 30 minutes of their time. Whenever I hit that room, I'm talking. Whenever I'm ready to leave, I'm just finishing up and pulling my card out of the classroom. So I tell them, this is the fastest 30 minutes of your time here at school. But I think for teachers, just take it like just one step at a time. If you can do one part of it, one day, come back to it, revisit it the next day, and just build upon it and just make it bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's amazing what you would come up with.
Yeah.
Last year, like I said, I did the cereal box unit, and I knew I wanted to create something for them to print out and investigate like different cereals. How could you marketing with these cereals? And that
Yeah.
took a half a year in itself. Just overlaying in Google Slideshow. How would you layer things and pull things,
Oh.
decorate things, and build things. So I'm all into like creating stuff. A lot
Ah,
of a lot of different classes, and that's another thing for teachers. Like, don't stop learning. And every year I try to build something over the summer, take a class or something like that, and learn a little bit more that I can bring back to my students. Never stop learning. And I'm 25 years into this technology, and I don't think I took a summer off just from learning and taking classes and seeing what I can do more of.
I love that. And with your cereal box thing, I'm sitting here thinking like, "Oh my gosh, you could tie media literacy into that."
Hmm.
And, like, the advertisements and how
Yep.
they're enticing you to buy and all this
Right,
kind of
right.
stuff. I'm
Where
like,
you put like the name of the cereal, or
yes.
the name of the cereal. Where do you put that on the box? You put it at the top, at the bottom, and characters. Where do you place the characters on the box?
Yeah. That's really cool. What do you think was the biggest takeaway for your students?
They liked the maps. Students love
Ah,
maps, and they're always wanting to find their house. Like, anytime whenever I go like into Google Maps, they're like, "Oh, I want to find my house. I want to find my house." And that's my first day. I'm like, "Okay, well, let's find your house. Let's find where Ellwood City is. Let's find where what street you might live on." So they love that, and they loved Google My Maps, and just to make their own map and pin different places. They loved that. Um, you know, and then
yeah,
how you embed it, like that's another whole thing. Like, okay, you made this in Google My Maps, but now we're going to put it in your Google site.
right.
So how can you embed that? So you have to take the embed code and put it into the Google site. And they loved seeing that. They're like, wow, that was easy. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't have to be hard. Technology is your friend, and it doesn't have to be that hard. And they loved seeing how things would incorporate, whether it's a slideshow or whether it's a Google map,
Into
into those
sites.
sites. Yeah.
How
Yeah.
cool. And I
Yeah.
just keep thinking as you're talking, I mean, so many real world skills, like
Right. And that's
technology
all what
and real life. I
right.
mean,
And that's what project based learning is. It's about, learning real world skills. And this project definitely is something real world. The kids love it. It's just amazing to me. Every time that I go into the class, they're excited for me to be there. And what are we going to do today, Mr. Scotchless? You told us last week we're going to make a Google site. Are we going to do that? I'm like, yeah, we're going to make a site today, and we're going to make the banners, and we're going to put pictures on the banners. it's just turned out to be such a great lesson. And I love teaching that. And I want to do more of these projects with the class, because one and done is great. But if you can build on something each week and have that learning, and like it's 7 days pass every time whenever I see my kids,
Yeah.
because the 5-day week plus the weekend. So they do forget. And I'm like, well, you
Mhm.
have to remember what we did last time, so, because we're going to build on it this week. So
Yeah.
it's fun to see them take ownership of this project, and at the very end they're going to stand up in front of their classmates and they're going to say, okay, these are my 3 national parks that I picked. This is me, at Old Faithful. And they're going to show those pictures, and they love that too.
Oh, I
Seeing
bet.
themselves in these pictures, and they'll pose or they'll jump. And I'm like, a lot of people jump at these national park signs. And I'll show, when we went out to Yellowstone a couple years ago, we were able to pose, in front of the signs. We went to Grand Teton and Glacier, and my girls, they were jumping. And I'm like, well, here's my daughters at the national park sign. And then I'm like, one of your pictures needs to be of you at the national park sign, and you can pose or you can jump. And so I'll see them jumping in the classroom, and they'll be taking their
That's
pictures
hilarious.
and
Yeah.
then taking the background off, putting them in. So it's just fun to, after you say something or after you teach something, just to stand back and say, they're doing this, they can
Yeah.
actually do this. And it's fun to see them grow and learn that way.
Yeah. That is just so cool. So I am so thankful for you sharing this with everybody,
Oh,
being willing to chat with me so that we can share this with our listeners, because I just think it's a really cool project and I hope it inspires somebody.
great. For those who are listening, investigate project based, and if there's something that you enjoy, because if you enjoy it, you're going to share that joy with your kids as well. So I'm passionate about these national parks, and I think the kids become passionate about their project as well, learning about the park. So if it's something that you enjoy and you can get some kind of learning through into your kids, they're going to love it.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much, Matt. Thanks for listening to our For the Love of EdTech podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today and learned something you can use with your own students. You can find the show notes, resources, and more at www.fortheloveofedtech.org.
For Love of EdTech is produced by SOIDA, the Southwestern Ohio Instructional Technology Association, in partnership with Think TV and CET, the local PBS stations in Dayton and Cincinnati.